It's -11 today, so I'll suit it up here. I finished Baldur's Gate 2, The Throne of Ball, yesterday. Finally. I played Baldur's Gate 1 and the first maybe 15 hours of Baldur's Gate 2 before Baldur's Gate 3 came out. Somewhat naively think I can knock those two games out in 2 weeks or something. Boy, was I wrong. So, considering that was in July, I don't necessarily have like the best memory of all of it as clearly as I normally would for a video like this, and I'm not really going to pretend to be too objective about these games, generally speaking. So what they do well, and the reason I think that they're classics, are they're very, very, very faithful, I think, not being that experienced myself, to what Dungeons & Dragons are like as a combat system and just a general style. Really, really nice animated backgrounds. I played the enhanced versions for both, which almost makes me think to some degree, because of like the adjustment for resolution, that it's easier to kind of pull out and zoom out and just move around the map without necessarily appreciating that especially a lot of the creature enemy designs are really quite good. Like Glabrizoos and Death Tyrants and all these things, Beholders, they look really great. There's a huge amount of different circumstances you go through. It's interesting to learn how Baldur's Gate 1 sort of mirrors a low-level quest a little more, and Baldur's Gate 2 mirrors a higher-level one, especially Throne of Ball. I was like in the early to mid-20s, depending on my character, by the end of Throne of Ball. And obviously 2 especially has a pretty interesting storyline, and it's very, very widely ranging. I would conservatively say I probably touched maybe 40% of the content in the game. There's a lot of stuff out in the map. There's a lot of stuff to do. A lot of places to go. I like how the story of 2... I like how it works. I like how you go through a lot of different areas, and I like the ways that it touches into Baldur's Gate 3, and I think they did a good job in Baldur's Gate 3 to some degree of touching on enough of stuff while still making it a fairly original story. That being said, partially because of the learning curve and having to figure out how these things go, I would say that for games that are purported to be classics, I have never in my life been more miserable playing a game series than I have been for these games. Especially all of Baldur's Gate 1, and especially the Throne of Ball. The more I look into Throne of Ball, the more that I feel like some of the sentiment online was that necessarily the same team that made Shadows of Amn made Throne of Ball, in terms of writing and just general scope of story. But Baldur's Gate 2, I remember it being quite a relief how much the quality of life improvements were more enjoyable than Baldur's Gate 1. But I admit, this is subjective, and I admit that a lot of it was the learning curve. Like I didn't play Baldur's Gate 1 that well. I didn't really know what I was doing. My main character kind of sucked. But generally speaking, this is my least favorite combat system of any game. Fights in Baldur's Gate 1, you'd just be standing there swinging aimlessly at people. A hard boss fight like Saravok or something, you would fail it 4 or 5 times in a row, and then just basically employ a similar strategy, and you would just kill him in 4 hits because you just got lucky. You're like, okay, well, I guess it worked that time. Or people would aggro in a different way, and it would go from impossible to ludicrously easy. And that's sort of the theme of how a lot of these battles went. There's a couple of fights, especially in Throne of Ball, Draconis, the dragon outside of Balzagal's lair, and the final fight as well, where this is either impossible due to how many of the crutches the game inserts for difficulty is just to make someone unhittable unless you use the proper debuffs. But then you look at the strategies and you try to figure out what to do, and the series of events it takes for you to render a boss's difficulty null just makes it go from way too challenging to it's stupidly easy. Spike traps, spamming remove magic, spamming breach and lower resistance until such a point. Oh, where's my angle here? Here you go. Spamming lower resistance until such a point that you can just one-shot it with Abi Dalzim's Horrid Wilting or something. Anyway, I don't want to get too much in the details, but okay, no, I will get into the details. I think this battle system is a fucking nightmare. Forgive me if I'm misunderstanding some of the ways that this works, but it seems like if you put on auto pause at the end of a character's turn and you watch when people's turns end, there is not synchronized turns. I'm not sure how it works between turns and rounds, but basically everyone's got their own action timer. If you need to cast a spell in a moment of emergency, or drink a potion, or do some sort of ability, you're just standing there like an idiot. Most of the time it's better to like right click for a while and just auto attack them. I need my angle. The sun's really low and it's bright out. And you're just standing there. Everyone's turns are desynced. Your ability to react to someone turning on your healer or your mage and messing them up is so opaque. Especially in the later parts of Throwing a Ball, the combat text is going so quickly that unless the combat text is running your whole screen, how are you supposed to tell half the things that are happening? Most of the time, you can't even tell what spell they're using unless you look at this tiny little image of a circle around them so you know what thing they're using that suddenly makes them mysteriously immune. The parts that are fun are getting new epic items with names on them. The vast majority of Baldur's Gate 1, I know I'm jumping all over here. The vast majority of Baldur's Gate 1, my gear sucked. Everything you have is like underwhelming. You're maybe near the end of Baldur's Gate 1, which the whole game was like a crypt diving nightmare to me. Like constantly getting hit by traps, because if you're walking along with detect traps illusions, there's sort of like a tick rate where you have to walk forward and then stop, and then walk forward and stop, and then walk forward and stop, or else you're not even going to detect these traps that you see. Poisons last an incredibly random amount of time. Any debuff, stun, confuse, fear, poison, they all last a totally indeterminate amount of time where you don't know whether a poison is going to tick until you die your full health bar or tick 3 times and you're fine. The whole game was miserable in this capacity, and the challenging fights, again, as I said, were either ones that took you 6 or 7 attempts or resolved themselves very, very easily. Fucking total nightmare, man. And I don't know much more about. I'm not sure much more about to say about it. There's some issues with Hexat, who was the vampire thief I used. I used an all evil party in the second game, which is kind of interesting, but doesn't really change anything except making you say snarky, mean comments more often, which is cool. It's not a bad way to do it. She was oddly bugged, like a couple of the dragon fights in Throne of Ball. No, sorry. In just the base version of Baldur's Gate 2. I basically cheesed by her dying, and then the dragon fixating on her like gaseous vampire form and attacking it constantly while the rest of my party railed them down. Overall, 84 hours into Baldur's Gate 2, probably 50-ish into Baldur's Gate 1. I regret playing Throne of Ball. Like, input to output, not worth it at all for the amount of time it was and how annoying and frustrating it was. I'm glad to have played these games, and I understand that there are a number of people who played these when they were young and have nostalgia for them. And they are very evocative, and the story is very cool. Especially if you look at the backgrounds, if you especially look at all the variety of different adventurous places you go to, there's a lot of really, really like imaginative stuff there. But these games are miserable experiences, especially if you don't really know what you're doing. And then I understand that there's like a nice element of replay value of playing a lot of different ways. But I would like to also say that like there's some games that, as someone who streams on Twitch, Dark Souls was kind of like this. This was kind of like this too. There are some people who play a game a million different times, and they're trying to recreate the way they felt when they first played something. So they go into other people's chats who have never played the game before, and then think that the game is easy because you've played it a dozen times and it should be obvious to someone. Like, that is like the weirdest person. Honestly, people being like, it's not cheese, it's a strategy. Just put 4 spike traps over where you know the boss is going to be and one-shot it. It's actually a really simple encounter. It's like the weirdest experience, man. So, in summation, miserable battle system, totally opaque. Who's going to get attacked, who's in danger, what you can do about it. The round turn system being desynced is essentially impossible to be able to figure out in like a live action video game environment. It's like what I said before. What I said yesterday is 1/4 turn based, 3/4 live action. But I'm glad to get the sort of like story and insight into the Baldur's Gate universe and all those things, and to kind of understand what it's going to be like when I get to play Baldur's Gate 3 again later on this winter. Good riddance.